All right. We're going live, I think. Can a couple of you let me know that you can hear me okay? I'm going to give it a minute or two here for others to join in. All right, good. Oops, I just bumped the camera. You know, you guys are my guinea pigs today. I've kind of put off doing a live painting show for a while just because it's a few more technical challenges than just doing kind of a talking head like Marty and I do. Just ask Val, she'll tell you. So having the art under your camera and making sure you can see the chat and see the art really well, and you know, all of that I've just kind of been putting off doing, and really even wondering, our connection here is not the greatest, so wondering if the resolution would even be worth, you know, broadcasting, so to speak. So I appreciate everyone being my guinea pigs today, and we will get going on this. Now, some of you may remember this piece. I did a glazing tutorial using this, and this has sat dormant for a few months. Just I got busy with other things, but I was really enjoying it, and I kind of put off coming back to it because I wanted to get back to it, but when I had either another tutorial or something I could make a video on, so rather than just, you know, paint a head on it, that's what I did. And you know, this live broadcast is really just kind of came up as an idea this past week. I didn't even know if I'd be doing this or not, so it was a busy week on Thanksgiving, and I'm still catching up this week. So this is kind of helping me do that rather than actually shooting and recording a video. So anyway, let's talk about supplies for a minute so everybody will know what I'm using. This is the Stonehenge Aqua hot press, 140-pound hot press block. And it is just a beautiful, beautiful paper. I won't say that this has supplanted Arches as my favorite, but it has the potential to, and I just want to paint for it with it for a long time before I make any kind of decisions. I don't know that anything will ever replace Arches, but this has come darn close so far. It's just a beautiful surface to paint on. Usually a good paper for me, of course, is 100% cotton, but when a paper just gets out of my way and lets me do what it is I want to do the way I want to do it, and I'm not thinking about the paper anymore, then I know it's a great paper. If I'm sitting here thinking, oh yeah, I've got to paint this way because this paper does this and does that, then, you know, it usually has some drawbacks, at least for my style. So that's kind of the way I judge it. It's not that, you know, there aren't other papers that are just as good. But this is a botanical, obviously, and I shot this, shot reference for this back in the spring. This is actually one of our trees. My dad planted this tree. It's a plum, an ornamental plum. And let me just talk about that for a minute, how I use reference, because I've had a lot of questions about how to use reference. And so I have three pictures. I have this one. Whoops, sorry. I have this one. And I have this one. Now, I do not shoot a picture and copy it. You can do that if you want, especially if it's your own photo. But I made this composition myself, and I used something from each of those shots for various parts here. And I basically just did my own floral arrangement. And I'm trying to do it sort of in the botanical style. The botanical style is just dropped out with no background. It's highly detailed, almost scientifically detailed if you stick with the very traditional uh, botanical style, and it's very realistic. It's the light is modeled sculpturally. The difference in sculptural light and realistic light is realistic light usually has a hard light source. Sculptural light is soft. So usually you will see a botanical done that way, and so I'm doing that. And these were shot on a very cloudy day, so I had nice sculptural light, but I still had nice shadows. And I am using some elements of each petal, like for instance, these details here, I'm using from this, although I redrew them, you know, to kind of match what I was looking for. But I'm using this for hints on contrast and light and shadow. I used some of the petals of this in here, not verbatim, but these are just giving me great clues for how they curl up on the edges and how the colors and light look when you do that. And this one was a great one for leaves. I got some ideas for leaves. I can see more vein detail in this shot. So I combine reference that way. This one, the color was different. This had a deeper kind of a wine color. And honestly, that was not very realistic. They weren't really that sort of burgundy. They were more magenta like this, but there were elements of this color. And so I like that. I like the way the shadow was. I'm using this bulb here, or bud. I'm using this bud sort of here as a model, and so on and so forth. I like this leaf. These leaves, if you can see, have tinges of red in it, along with the green. In fact, this leaf over here, and I still haven't decided if I'm going to do a leaf like this. I think I will, but it's almost orange, green, and red. So it's just a beautiful, interesting tree. And I take all of that reference and combine it in my own composition, and I work piece by piece. Now let me just, well, first of all, let me finish talking about supplies. I'm using my Mission Gold pan set today. I'm not using M. Graham. This is a beautiful set, but the reason I'm doing this is because I like the reds. That particular palette has these really intense reds, and this is Crimson Lake, Permanent Magenta, and Rose Madder, and I'll be using those and even some bright clear violet. I have some M. Graham colors approximating that, but I don't have the magenta, and they're quinacridones, but I don't have this permanent magenta, and I really like that. And their greens are brighter. Even though I'm muting down these greens, I can start really bright. So it's just a really bright, intense color. And these really are the same. If you're interested or have been interested in Mission Gold, the pan set is really the same kind of paint. It's sort of a honey formulation. And by the way, I'm putting links down below to the glazing tutorial I did where I started this, another glazing tutorial on glazing basics. Those video links will be down in the description, and I've got links to all of these supplies. So you can, once this is over, you can follow those if you like. All right. So the process has been gradual, and the way I like to do this is sort of fill and color in everything in almost flat tones with maybe some very slight shaded modeling. And that I've done. You can see most everything is painted. And then from there, I just start adjusting contrast and intensity where I want it. You can see if you look, you can see how much more contrast there is here in these elements because I've been working on those. Now I don't work systematically in that I don't finish this flower, then go up here and finish this flower and finish this flower. What I do is I try to work the whole thing. So as I bring contrast down, or up, I guess would be correct, and intensity up, I say, so I wonder how dark this leaf should be. And I will go in and do some of that, and I'll get started on that in a second. So that's how I work. I try to work the whole thing, and I'm trying to focus my center of interest in here, with, you know, the eye traveling through here, and the rest of it just kind of being, you know, ancillary to that. So I will have less contrast most likely out here, so as not to split the composition or split the focus of your eye. So that's just a little of my thought process. And the adjustment, let me just go ahead and get started. The adjustments are usually just are gradual. I'll do a little bit and then decide, you know, is that enough? How much more do I need? Let it dry. And it may take, you know, half a dozen glazes. It may only take 2 in some of the lighter areas. So this stroke that I just put down is basically how I work the whole thing. It's just, they're simple, transparent glazes. While a glaze is wet, I will do some charging. And blend. And I go from large to small. I won't get into today probably the vein detail. That'll be last because that's a small detail. So I'm still working all the major contrasts and major washes and values. Okay. And then assessing where I am. That's it. That's the process in a nutshell. And botanicals like this, it's tedious. I'll just talk about this leaf for a minute. So that's all fairly flat painted, although I'm starting to add the shading. I want to get the idea that the leaf is not flat. It's actually like this, or it may be like that. Or if you're looking at it edge on, it may be like this. So that's going to do things with the light. So there's an undulation here. Let me just show you some reference so you know what I'm talking about. You can see how, like in this leaf, how they go in to the center. You can also see in a leaf like this how they undulate. So that does things to the light. So I'm using those as clues. And there's an undulation down in there. Excuse me while I'm mixing some colors here. And the basic shape of my shadow is that. And, you know, you have to remember that watercolor dries about 10 to 20% lighter than when you put it down. So a lot of times I'll work a shadow like that, and then I'll let it dry while I'm working on something else and come back to it. That's just the tedious process of glazing. And I want to keep, you can see now how this is light and that's light. I want to keep those light areas so it looks like it's coming over and under and over. And while this is wet still, I can charge in there. And then sometimes I even use my finger either in a paper towel or just squeeze it out. And that makes a good way to blend those edges. Usually back blend right into them with a damp brush to keep them smooth. As I get more into the details, like veins and stuff, I can be more dry brush. But somebody once was surprised how much, and I guess I was doing a landscape, at how much I use my finger. I do. I use my finger a lot because it's great just to quickly blend out and dry out an edge. So now you can see we got a little undulation going there in that leaf, and I'm happy with that. I think I'm going to work this edge here and get that leaf to roll down in if I can. And it's also going up under the petal, so we're working on a lot of the color I'm using right now is palette dirt. It's just a bunch of colors I already had down on the palette, and they're about right, so I'm just mixing them all together as I find them. But I flagged the colors out of this palette, listed the whole palette below in the description, but I also flagged the colors that I mainly use on this painting, so you'll know what their names are if you're interested in matching them up, you know, with Mission Gold if you have those. So I'm just deepening the shadow where this scoots behind that petal. And really paying attention to the way these leaves are in dimension, you know, how they bend and how they undulate, or just really makes a difference in making a believable leaf. You know, it's very easy to have the leaf look too cut out. And I've painted my share of leaves that look too cut out, believe me. And there will be veins, you know. I'm not painting them now, but there will be veins coming off, and they'll actually have some roll to them. But see, I'm noticing now that I deepen that where that rolls into the center. Now this side is looking a bit cut out, so I'm going to have to roll that in a little bit too. Right now, I'm almost dry brushing. There are several ways to blend. Dry brushing is one of them. But I'm just trying to get some slight color here to make it look like that part of it is rolling in. You know, some of the spine of this leaf will naturally form. I didn't paint that as a line. I try not to paint things too linearly if I can help it, or else they just look like a line. That's just formed naturally, that line where I've overlapped paint. And because it's transparent, you know, it produces sort of an edge. And this leaf is curling down and under, so the tip is going to be darker. You know, that's I've mentioned this before in comments to people and videos that I've made. Really, half the battle with extreme realism is just observation. You know, observe something and then observe it again and then observe it again in even more detail. But you know, basically observing what your eye perceives. Now, see that worked. I'm happy with that. That made that point of that leaf look like it's turning down under. So you can see the process here, and it's just adjusting this. And when I get to a certain stage here, I may not necessarily be finished, but I'm probably going to move on to another leaf. And again, I bring them all along gradually. And I wondered about, I played with the idea of having a slight cast shadow here. No, I don't think I will. I'll keep it soft sculptural light, I guess. Right now, a lot of the color is not even super important. I can always glaze, like for instance, if I say I want it more yellow green out here or there, I can always do a light, especially if it's a light color, at the end when I'm putting in my final detail. I'm just trying to keep it a fairly mute monochromatic green to get my values right. A lot of times, and there are a lot of oil painters that do this, separating value from color is a very good way to paint. It's hard to consider color and value at the same time if you're really trying to be realistic. Right now I'm dry brushing, have a little bit of color on, and as my brush dries out, I'm just making use of it. Many of you are familiar with Anna Mason and her amazing botanical art. She has a different method. She will start in and start doing, like, she'll start light areas, and I may be getting this wrong, but as I gathered in the few tutorials that I've watched, she'll start doing some light areas, and where I'll model the whole thing very lightly and start adjusting down contrast. She'll start with a light area and then go down and find her darkest areas. And that's fine. That's a fine technique if you can make that work, and she obviously does. I like to do it gradually because I don't know, even if it's the dark, even if I think it's the darkest area, I don't necessarily know right off the bat if I want it that dark. You know what I mean? So I didn't know how dark this spot here needed to be, but I can tell I wanted it darker. So it's hard for me to put in that area and say, boom, there, that's the darkest spot on the whole painting. And now I'm going to go and bracket all the other values to meet that. So it's just two different ways of handling it, and it's whatever you're comfortable with. I'm more comfortable with gradual adjustment. By the way, I'm using an Escoda Versatile. Actually, what I wanted to do, I'm going to switch brushes. In the recent brush video that I did, this was a new set. By the way, if you hear this creaking sound, sounds like, you know, the Crypt Keeper's door opening. That's my noisy chair. You hear that? I'm sorry about that. I can't get that to stop. So I'm not about to be ambushed by the Crypt Keeper. That's just my chair. Anyway, I wanted to take this time today to try out these Golden Naturals. This is a silver brush. It's a blend of natural hair, which nobody is quite sure what that is. It's not Kolinsky sable, and synthetic. And they do a pretty good job, as far as I've been able to tell, of mimicking a Kolinsky. It's very similar actually to the Escoda Versatile, which is the same thing. It's a synthetic and natural hair mixture. But these have sensational points. Question will be how long they can keep them. So anyway, I want to switch to that and do what I originally planned and give them a fair go. Yeah, see that shadow for that undulation. I don't think I want to touch that right now because I could make that too dark. I'm actually staring at my reference right now. You know, when I was talking about observation, with botanicals especially if you want to paint sort of in the tradition, you pay attention to all sorts of details, like the fact that these leaves are not smooth; they have sawtooth kind of edges, and you even pay attention to the fact that the sawtooths become more pronounced towards the edge than they do back towards the back of the leaf, where they become more rounded. Now, if you just want a convincing leaf, you may not care about that, but that's part of the botanical tradition because botanicals started out as scientific illustrations before they had cameras, and they filled whole books with them. Now, this is all fairly dull in terms of vibrancy and intensity. I will probably adjust that, but closer to the end when I'm putting in some veining. And I'm going to do just a tiny bit of that because I want you to see rather than, wait till I'm nearly done. There's hours of work still ahead for me in this painting, so this will not be done today. One tip too, this is a tendency of beginners. When you're painting something that's behind another object, make sure you're following the contour of that object and not the contour of the object in front of it. Otherwise, you'll get this weird looking halo. So if I'm like painting shadow, I did follow it a little bit, but I blended that follow. But if you're painting any texture or any kind of shading, it's best to paint out from it and follow the form of the leaf. Or if you have a vein, follow that. Don't follow around the edge, at least with brush strokes you can see, where you're going to have, a halo that looks like you painted an object that wasn't part of the object in back, if any of that made sense. I need to go over here, and I have several of these pans that are not wetted enough, so I'm adding water to them. But I like the way the dynamics of this leaf are starting to work. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about with the intensity. So let's say I'm in the final stages and I say, oh, this leaf, I want that to look greener. I like the shading, but it could be a more brilliant green. So I've got a more brilliant green, and I'm just going to glaze it right over that shadow. Because it's a light color, the shadow, and it's transparent, of course, shadow shows through, but now I just increased the intensity. And I don't know how much of that you can tell on a webcam. That was part of my fear. But I can see it here. The intensity of that green just increased. And I can keep doing that if I want to. But I will wait probably towards near the end to do much of that kind of adjustment. I am going to kind of pre-plan some little furrows. These veins come off and little furrows. They're not just a line, you know. If you're painting leaves, watch that. There will be kind of a furrow or a little valley where those leaves come out, so you can kind of pre-plan that. Again, you've got to have good reference and observe. So maybe I'll just slightly hint at where some veins will be. I'm pretty much dry brushing now because I still have some of that bright green in my brush. Might as well rub it out where it's needed. If you've seen my video on dry brushing, I did an example of a bird. When you get to dry brushing, it gets to that stage where the paint is just dryly coming off your brush. It's almost like using a colored pencil. Right now, that's the way it feels. It feels like I'm using a colored pencil. You can blend that way. As your brush dries out from your lighter washes, you can make use of that paint in places where it might be needed. Stuff like that. It's cool. It's a satisfying process. You know, sort of now that I've added that intense green, it makes me want to just keep doing that. I'm going to hold off though, because I know I need to pay attention to some other areas. We have any questions yet? I'm going to take a quick break. Question: what brushes are you using? Okay, I think that probably was asked before I mentioned it. Silver brush, Golden Naturals, and I started out with an Escoda Versatile. Both of them are not Kolinsky Sable, but they are acrylic or synthetic blends with a natural hair. I don't see any other questions right now. You can see this petal here needs a little more contrast in places, so let's work that. And that's probably got about 3 or 4 glazes on it already. And modeling these turns, or these where the petals flip over, that's tricky because there's actually on the outer edge it'll either be highlight, like for instance, this is pretty much overhead light. I think maybe slightly coming this way. It'll be pretty light. But in a case like this right here, where this turns under, it's going to be very dark. So you want to have a very extreme gradation from almost white to deep, or it'll look cut out. So you're getting that turn of the pedal. Now what I'm actually going to do right now though is I want to add some red in here and deepen this. There are places where it's more red and less magenta, and that was one place. So I wanted to adjust that. And down in here, that's very light because it's coming out and it's cupping out towards the light, so it's catching the light. So I want to be careful not to get that too dark. That helped. I think that helped that pedal turn over a little better. I need to find that in my reference, which one I was using. Sorry about that. This is kind of interesting. That has nothing to do with painting. I took this, I thought, that's kind of weird. What is that? And the closer I look, that's actually a little insect right there. It looks like a green leaf. You can see the legs down here, probably not on a webcam, but anyway, I thought that was kind of cool. But this is what I'm talking about. See the top edges of these petals turning over? They're very light. Probably the lightest part of the whole thing. Well, that's what I got going on right here. So in watercolor, light is determined by shadow. So I'm probably gonna have to adjust this leaf. I just painted magenta on my leaf. That was really great, Steve. Anyway, I'm probably gonna have to adjust my green under there. Now let's go ahead and do that. I want to be very careful not to make that look like that halo I was telling you about. So I'm going to paint into and away from that edge. Also, in blending, you want to make sure that you keep your edge wet enough to blend. Some of that depends on paper too, because some papers stain quicker and more permanently. For instance, I can't stand fluid paper. There are some people out there that swear by fluid paper. I can't stand it. It's 100% cotton paper, but it just stains so doggone easily and quickly. I've never been able to use it for my style of painting. But I'm loving this Stonehenge though. Love it, love it, love it. That's still a little dark because it hasn't dried. You'll see me do this a lot. I'll squeeze moisture out, but at the same time, I'll flatten out my brush so it's almost like a cat's tongue or a miniature fan brush. I use that sometimes to blend. All right, see what I did to the value there on that edge. I'm just looking right now and assessing. This petal here, the contrast is nearly right. I probably won't do a whole lot more. One thing I wanted to since this is a stage I'll probably get to later, but I wanted to mention about small details, especially on botanicals. It's watercolor pencils are great for like cleaning up an edge. You can match the color. I just pulled out these Prismacolors. I probably have some better brands somewhere, but I have some Faber-Castells, but I did pull them out. This is like a violet. Even if you're not wanting it to have a colored pencil or a watercolor pencil look or line, usually you can get away with it on these minuscule details. In my photo reference, these aren't nearly so defined, but I wanted to define them more in my painting. So that's one thing you can do. And I actually, when I started it, I actually masked each of these little, I don't know what you call it, or stamens or pistils or whatever they are, the little tips of those. I masked those off with mask and that there so that I could paint on a white surface. So that's just a tip I wanted to give you. And I will probably use colored pencil, watercolor pencil, when I'm getting down to the very final vein detail in some of these petals. But that I'll save to last. But I'll start stroking that in. Let me say something about veins. They're easy to overdo. And you can see the very subtle, hopefully on webcam, you can see the very subtle veining in that. I'll try to hold it still. So, in that petal. And in most cases, they are lost and found. In other words, a vein will appear and then it'll disappear and appear. I see a lot of veins that are just done almost graphically, just line, 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 line. Almost like a graphic design. And if you're going for that, that's fine. But if you're trying to be realistic, veins in petals and on leaves are far, far, far more subtle than you think. And just the slightest hint is what you want to do. Just be very careful. I put down I was testing it, I put down some violet watercolor pencil there. And watercolor pencil darkens a little when you activate it. So I was just kind of showing myself how subtle it was going to be or needed to be. All right, so I had been working on this leaf, and this spine goes right down there, and it's going this way instead of cupping, it's going this way. So I want to kind of emphasize that peak. So I'm going to come down along the edge of it and then blend it out behind. Emphasize the fact that there is a spine there on that leaf. Golden Naturals, they paint really well. They're surprisingly very much like a Kolinsky, and that's really what everybody's trying to do these days in brush making is mimic or imitate a Kolinsky sable. Now I'm getting a lot more nice form in that leaf. I'm starting to be happy with that. This is, you know, doing this kind of watercolor work. Of course, I'm talking and instructing right now, but you know, when I'm doing it alone, it's just a zen place. It's like coloring. You know, once you've got your drawing down and you've got good reference at your side, then it's just getting into your zen place and having fun. Just what I did is just flicked a little bit of paint on that edge, and I'm going to let the edge light-wise just sort of disappear right there so as not to overstate it. And then this leaf kind of undulates. So show you my reference for that. I like that leaf curl. There it is right there. But I've taken some liberties with it, but you can see now here it doesn't. It dips into the middle, but somewhere I know I had a leaf where the ridge actually rose in the middle. I don't see it right away, but anyway, that's what I'm doing. Gotten this underside pretty well, but I will probably continue to deepen that edge. That looks really dark. And it is. It will dry a whole lot lighter. And whether it's realistic or not, as I mentioned towards the outset, is not always the indication or the problem or the key. It's keeping your eye in your center of interest. So I got to be careful here, putting that much contrast that far away from this. This looks like I'm hoping that'll dry a lot lighter. Maybe I should pick up some of that. I'll draw your eye away from where I want the center of interest to be. Oh, we'll see. We'll let that dry, and I can blot that. That's re-wetting and lifting enough. I can blot that if I need to later. Maybe just continue over here to add pops of contrast. It's pretty clear to see, I think, that you watch me do this kind of painting, or someone like Billy Shoal, or someone like Anna Mason, that watercolor is anything but just a medium that has to be used free and washy. If I had to say now where my deepest color is, it would probably be boom right there. You can see what that's doing to make that all pop. All right, I was going to try to keep this to 45 minutes to an hour. Anybody have any questions that you want to post now? I'm looking back through, but it can be about this, it can be about the supplies, it can be about, yeah, I see one here. Questions, were the stamens masked out previously? Yes, they were. Both here and here. Anybody have a question about something that I might do on this painting, but haven't done yet, like how I would handle it, or this, what size brushes? This, Silver Brush, their sizing doesn't match everybody else's. They call this a 12. And that's, if you compared it to other brushes, a more standardized sizing, that would be a 6. They call it a 12. Same with this. This is another Golden Natural. They call this a 14. In most cases, a 14 would be at least double to 3 times that size. So you can't really go by sizing, at least not the number. You just kind of have to look at it. I would call this, aside from their designation of 12, I would call this more like a 6 in most people's. And this more like an 8. This is typical of an 8 in most people's. So that's size. How long would it take me to do this piece? Because I start and stop so much, it's kind of hard to put it into hours, but this is probably the most time-consuming type of painting that I do. I would say to this point, I probably have 4 hours in it already. I will probably put at least that much more in it. So, but I usually work an hour at a time, go away, do something else. Half hour here. It's just really kind of hard to say. How many layers will this take approximately? It varies. Because I'm constantly adjusting, I may get a leaf just right after 2 or 3 layers, or I may, like I've got probably, in places I've got 3 here, and in some places, like the lightest areas, that's just 1. So I would say between 2 and 4 throughout. On this bud here, I've already got probably 4 layers, because I'm still playing with how to adjust the value and intensity. And I'm going to have a lot in here because I will have some intensity layers and some more value deepening layers. I don't know that I ever get past 6 or 7 or 8. I have painted paintings where I've done more layers, but it's usually because I'm changing my mind on something. But the thing to remember is it always gets darker. You don't recover highlights unless you're scrubbing. It always gets darker. No, my Escoda brush was not a rigger. That was a standard round. It was the Versatile. Do you ever get right into painting without having an underdrawing? Sure, but that's usually looser. I don't recommend anybody do that unless you're really confident about doing that. If I've already done a sketch or a study, I may do that on the paper without an underdrawing. A lot of times in sketchbook works and studies, I'll just go right into painting. If it's going to be a finished painting that might hang, I almost always have a bit of an underdrawing and a sketch, I will not do a background on this. I'm doing this in a fairly traditional botanical style, so there will be no background. Will I ever be doing another workshop with fans like I did a few months ago? Yes, probably so. I don't know, sometime in hopefully in early 2018. Did I pre-wet the paper surface? Mostly, no. What happens is a lot of times I'll be painting an area, and it's almost all of these glazes are wet over dry. But after I put down a glaze, while it's still wet, I may go back and charge into that. But it's usually a little area, like maybe no bigger than this. And so that much of the area is wet. and I'm just charging in color. But most of this style of painting is wet over dry. Now a lot of times when I'm painting in the main flat wash, I'll paint in the whole leaf. Like say this was mostly a flat wash, and I have some modeling to do on this leaf. So that was all painted in with one wash. But it was not pre-wet with clear water. So while that is wet, and I did a little bit, I charged in a little bit down here, because I knew eventually that tip was going to be darker. So yeah, that's it. Mostly wet over dry. No pre-wetting clear. There have been times, I guess, that I've pre-wet an area of a leaf with clear because I wanted to get that little kind of bleeding effect, but generally that's not the case. How many layers would the paper take? As many as you want to put on it. Eventually it'll get black. I mean, if you took something until it was like, it was almost black, you know, for the darker colors. I mean, you can see, you can't tell me, the darker color, you can't tell me what those colors are probably just by looking at them. They all look black. That's because it's become so opaque. There's so much paint in that pan. Eventually you get enough paint on there. The paper's not limited, basically. Do I ever use special scrubber brushes? Yes. As a matter of fact, that brings up one thing I wanted to mention just quickly. Sorry, I just kicked my desk. This was going to be a tip, but I forgot to mention it. A lot of times when you're painting along watercolor, it's easy to create edges that you don't want, and there's two reasons for that. Watercolor, especially when the wash is very wet, watercolor pushes the pigment out to the edge. Now, the more even you make the wash, the better. And cotton paper helps with that too. You tend to create edges more on pulp paper. But anyway, my point is that watercolor has a tendency to create edges with a wash, and you can paint so they don't show up, but you have to paint very evenly and not overly wet. Well, the other thing is edges will be created when you overlap. Sometimes edges that you don't want. I've got one right here. I painted this. I got a nice flat wash without an edge, but I painted this leaf over it and created an edge there. So a lot of times I will do some lifting. I have stages of lifting that go from, you know, light and less aggressive to more aggressive. My first, of course, is just a regular watercolor brush. The second would be like this is an oil bristle brush, and so to get rid of that edge, I will probably just lightly try to brush it away, or at least soften it, you know. And to actually get to the answer to the question, yes, I will sometimes use a special brush that's just called a scrubber. And this is a bigger one. This is meant to scrub. It is super stiff, like a toothbrush. It's just a nylon bristle. You know, interestingly enough, though, when you use a scrubber, you don't really scrub. At least you can, but you'll abrade the paper something awful. If you have good cotton paper, that's not as big a deal. But even with good cotton paper, you don't want to do that too much. Usually what I do is I blot an area with water, maybe a regular brush and tissue until I've lifted as much paint I can that way, and then I very gently start to rub. And these stiff brushes will pull up paint usually pretty well, depending on the paper. So yeah, this is a Creative Mark scrubber. Silver Brush makes a whole bunch. They come in all different shapes and sizes. Like this is a rounded one. I've got some little bitty ones. I've got some that are kind of flat, chisel edge or angular. So you can get those. But I try first, if it's just a softening or gentle lifting, I'll try just a regular, maybe just a regular watercolor brush that's stiffer, like an acrylic. If you saw my last brush episode, this right here, this Grumbacher Golden Edge is one of the stiffest. It's a golden Taklon, one of the stiffest watercolor brushes that I've found till you get into a bristle. So you might try that, a stiff acrylic, and then the next step would be like a bristle brush, like you use for oil or acrylic. And then, depending on what you want to do, just lift a faint bit or soften a faint bit. So anyway, that's the answer to that question. Oh, wow, we were already gone an hour. I'll look back here real quick. Hi, Lindsay. Glad you stopped by. See if there were any questions I missed. Thank you. Thank you for the compliments on the work. For everybody that gave them, not just Lindsay. Question. All right, I don't see it. All right, one last question call, and we'll call this episode done. I know I didn't do very much, but that's botanicals for you. It's a long, tedious process. Fun process. Thank you, Eve. Appreciate that. Thank you, everyone, so much for tuning in. My first time doing this live painting thing. I was a little nervous, mainly because of the tech aspects of it and whether or not it would turn out. But I really enjoyed this. And somebody, I think, asked the question before, and I didn't get to answer it. More live, please? Yes, I will be doing more live because I just thoroughly enjoyed this. All right, everybody. Everybody have a great evening, and we will see you guys in the next video or the next broadcast. I think Marty and I are planning to do one. He's going to host it. I don't know, maybe next week. He's just been really busy. So we're going to do one on watercolor paper, and that ought to be fun. So we'll talk to everybody then. Bye-bye.